You are listening to Ukraine 242. We bring you interview subjects from all walks of life in wartime in Ukraine. Thanks to all our listeners around the world.
Welcome to Ukraine 242, a weekly program that features interviews with experts and key people on the ground in Ukraine and around the world, responding to events and issues since the Russian invasion. I'm your host for this week, Ursula Ruedenberg. Last February, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the creation of a branch of the Ukrainian armed forces dedicated specifically to drone warfare. This March, the United Kingdom expanded its commitment to providing the Ukrainian armed forces with more than 10,000 drones developed in the UK. These declarations come after years of the effective grassroots development of drone warfare in Ukraine. To get a better understanding of drone warfare in Ukraine, we are pleased to be joined by journalists from Euromaidan Press, an online English-language independent newspaper based in Ukraine launched by Ukrainian volunteers. Both Alya Shandra and Bohdan from Euromaidan Press have recently written on the topic of drones. Ben is a researcher in the field of social and ethical philosophy and local governance. Shandra is the editor-in-chief at Euromaidan Press. She starts out the conversation by explaining the role that drone warfare is playing during the invasion of Ukraine.
We are seeing a revolution in warfare. Never before in any wars have drones been used in the quantity and the ways that they have been using now. And whoever wins in the drones race could very well win in the war. These drones have changed the nature of warfare so much. For instance, drones are being heavily used by both sides to attack armored vehicles of the other side. And it has made using armored vehicles in the battlefield much, much more difficult. This is one of the reasons for the failure of Ukraine's counteroffensive this summer. The idea was to use the Western tanks, Western armored vehicles to break through Russian fortifications, but this was made impossible because the Western vehicles that Ukraine was using were attacked by drones. And this basically canceled out all of the strategy that was planned for the counteroffensive. And right now we're witnessing this drone race between Ukraine and Russia to innovate faster, to produce drones faster. And the outcome of this drone race is not clear at all. And just so the listeners understand, a drone can only fly to its target if it keeps connection to the person that's directing the drone and telling it where to fly. And electronic warfare aims to interfere in the radio frequencies that maintain this connection. So it's a lot of different jamming equipment to jam the frequency that the drones and base are using.
The drones don't function with internet technology. They function with radio technologies. Is that how the connections are made?
Mostly, yes. Also, there are some types of drones, especially sea drones, which use internet, and that's why Starlinks are important to navigate these drones. But FPV drones, for example, yes, they use just ordinary radio technology.
I mean, it's a constant quest to find which frequencies are not jammed, which frequencies should be jammed. And this is also something that it's a separate developing field, the field of electronic warfare that aims to jam the drones. And in this, the Russians unfortunately have an advantage to Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, of course, are learning fast, but from the latest news that I've been hearing, they're still struggling to catch up.
So this race continues. For example, the developer of R-18 drone, which is dropping bombs on Russian positions, explained how this developing process constantly changes because as soon as they have made some improvements to this drone, it can fly for a few months, attack Russians, but then they will again detect how they can use electronic warfare or some other devices to stop it. And then again, these Ukrainian engineers should look for new countermeasures, and so it goes. And the same is going on the Russian side, and Ukrainians are learning from them.
When you say they're learning from each other, the way this happens is that both Russians and Ukrainians are capturing each other's drones and seeing how they're made. Is that how the process happens?
Yes, capturing is of course very valuable, but also constant tests. So you can make a drone, you can fly it, see whether it works or it doesn't work, why it doesn't work, was it stopped by electronic warfare, was it not aimed properly, and so on. You can improve it and test again.
And I'm speaking with Bohdan Ben and Alya Shandra from the Euromaidan Press, which is an online English language independent newspaper. Alya and Bohdan, before we go any further, give us an idea of what kinds of drones we are talking about and their different uses.
All type of drones, a huge variety of them. Bombers, reconnaissance drones, long-range drones, small FPV drones, thousands of drones used every day. Many of them are kamikaze drones, which explode and are lost. So army needs constant replenishment stocks of drones, especially now when there is artillery shortage on the front line. And other interesting thing is that the Ukrainian army was the first one to introduce special drone companies in each brigade. For example, one of my friends, he is a commander of this company, and I can tell you how he operates. Mostly these are night missions because drones are equipped with night vision devices. And the last time we spoke with him, they hit 3 tanks and 2 armored vehicles in one night with these drones bombers. And this is not an exception. It often happens, especially now when Russian offensive still continues. There are different munitions used in these drones because so far there is not some kind of standardized one munition for all types of drones. For example, the so-called Baba Yaga drone, this is the name of the drone, a horrible woman from Ukrainian fairy tales. So these drones are dropping mortar grenades sometimes. Some, I know, they even use explosives from anti-tank mines for self-made bombs.
Bohdan earlier mentioned the types of drone that we are using, and basically they can be divided into big drones, multi-mission drones that can fly for long distances, that can carry a lot of weight, a lot of bombs, long-distance drones. And there are the short-distance drones that conduct short-distance reconnaissance and deliver smaller bombs. And it is these short-distance drones that are being used in huge numbers. And one big part of these short-distance drones are just Mavic drones. They're like wedding drones that hover above an area and they take a picture of what's happening. And these play a huge role in, for instance, in artillery guidance. Because modern artillery guidance, it's really impossible without conducting this reconnaissance. They also help conduct reconnaissance where the enemy's positions are situated. So they're just drones that hover above a territory and make pictures and send a video signal. But another very rapidly developing field are FPV drones, first-person view drones. They were earlier used for racing, for sports. So basically, people would race at very high speeds with these drones to overcome obstacles. It was really like a sports. So you put on goggles and you see what the drone is seeing, basically. You and the drone become one and you race together with the drone and these goggles. So right now, this is the most rapidly developing field in drone technology because it allows you to go very fast and further away and to strike very precise strikes, for instance, at the tank turret or to fly inside a trench. And this requires really great skills from the pilot. So pilots need to be trained to pilot this drone with great agility and precision. And after that, it's very, very high precision strikes against the enemy armor.
So these drones are used less for reconnaissance and for spying.
They're used for reconnaissance as well. They're used as kamikaze drones, but they also have the newest versions. They can release a bomb. They're very flexible, really, but the greatest difference is that they can be piloted for very, very precise missions and very fast strikes. And also, as Bohdan mentioned, because Ukraine is facing an artillery shortage, it's trying to make it up precisely with these FPV drones. So ramping up production, it's one of the challenges. And one more thing that I need to mention about FPV drones, why they are so important, why they're so crucial. Production costs is $500, and that $500 drone can save a tank that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is why they have revolutionized the warfield. We're talking right now about drones that are being used in the battlefield, but of course, one of the major factors giving Ukraine an edge over the more powerful Russia is its long-range drones, not only in the air but also in the sea. As you know, Ukraine is limited in its ability to strike objects on Russian soil with Western missiles. So that's like a big red line. I mean, our territory is vulnerable to Russian strikes, so Ukraine has found ways to move around this limitation to actually attack Russian objects. Because, I mean, we're here exposed to Russian missile strikes. Last winter, they blew out all of our power system. So what Ukrainians have done is they have developed a lot of different long-range drones. And these drones, they're flying for 400, 500 kilometers. They're striking Russian airfields. They're striking Russian military production sites. They're striking oil refineries, basically attacking crucial sectors of Russia's military. And Ukraine is achieving actually great success with these drones. And this has compensated for the lack of long-range missiles, for its lack of aviation. And marine drones, this is a huge success story that is actually overlooked by much of the world. Many varieties of marine vehicles with explosives were developed and sent to attack vessels of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Ukraine is a country without an active fleet, and it has managed to take out roughly 1/3 of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. And thanks to this, Russia has moved the ships away from the western side of the Crimean Peninsula, and they've relocated most of them to its bases in Russia proper and not occupied Crimea. And it is thanks to this that Ukraine was actually able to open the Black Sea grain export route. As you remember, when Russia drew out of the grain agreement and basically reneged on its pledge to not attack merchant vessels that were exporting grain to countries of the global south from Ukrainian ports, no NATO country actually wanted to intervene to do something about this really blatant violation of the freedom of navigation. So Ukraine was left to its own devices to actually open a way for the exports of its grain from its ports, and it did this thanks to the marine drones. So basically, when all the NATO countries of the Black Sea basically did not want to intervene, then Ukraine was able to find a solution with its own devices, with its own innovation of these marine drones.
You know, we also see on the internet videos of drones helping people get out of combat areas, being used to find people that are missing. How big a role is that playing? Are drones used a lot to rescue people as well as to attack?
There's a very important aspect with saving lives and these drones, because Russia greatly outnumbers Ukraine with manpower, and they do not spare their manpower. I mean, the infamous meat assaults that are basically the Russian secret to gaining the little kilometers that they could gain on the front line. They do not spare their men. They just destroy everything in sight with artillery. And basically, during these assaults, of course, Ukraine doesn't have as many resources. We spare our soldiers. We are trying to adapt to NATO's standards, where human life is considered to be the utmost priority, and move away from these Soviet methods of bloody warfare. So drones are especially important in this regard, because they allow a soldier to stay away from the battlefield, to have a higher chance of survival. And I know that several of my friends that were soldiers since 2022 on the front line, they are learning to be FPV pilots, because they understand that it allows them to be highly effective, and it also allows them to stay behind the front line.
There are many cases when soldiers are trying to evacuate wounded comrades. For example, land drones. Actually, what just has started developing this new special drones, which the Ukrainian Minister of Strategic Industries said should be the priority for this year. And these land drones are capable, for example, to take wounded out from the battlefield, or bring some supplies to the front line, or land mines without human presence. And it's a very common tactic when Russian sniper was firing not to kill but to wound a soldier, and then he was waiting until second one will come to evacuate, and he would kill this second one and wait until the third one would come, and so on. So to stop these casualties, the possibility to evacuate wounded soldiers by drones which are riding on wheels is a huge improvement, and this is a technology that already exists. But the cases are still exceptions. These are some innovations that still should be placed on mass production, and hopefully it will be introduced quite soon.
Is this like a vehicle that's controlled by remote control, or what is a land drone?
Basically, it's just like a short car which children play with. So it's the same technology, but just a big one.
It rolls on wheels?
Yes. And it can be from up to 2-3 meters to take 100 soldiers from the battlefield.
You mentioned earlier that drone warfare was really important because of the lack of artillery Ukraine is experiencing. In terms of importance, has drone warfare eclipsed artillery?
The drones can't replace artillery just because of the weight of explosives that drones are carrying. And also artillery can fire on the longer range. And if we speak about rocket artillery even further, the drones don't have this capacity mostly. And because of that, artillery will not be replaced by drones, at least in the short term. And that's why artillery shells are still really a must-have for the armed forces. It's just because of the lack of these shells that drones must be used. Drones have their specific missions, which they are good at, but artillery remains the most effective and the main firepower.
This is Ursula Ruedenberg, and you're listening to Ukraine 242, a weekly program that features interviews with experts, key people on the ground in Ukraine and around the world, responding to events and issues since the Russian invasion. Our guests, Alya, Shandra, and Bohdan are speaking with us from Euromaidan Press in Ukraine, an online English-language independent newspaper. In the wake of recent governmental and foreign support for drones in the Ukrainian armed forces, they are explaining the use and grassroots movement of drones in combat. Last February, I think on February 6th, Zelensky signed a decree which created a separate part of the Ukrainian armed forces dedicated to drones. Does this decree change anything, or was that more of a formality?
We should start briefly from 2014 when the war in Donbass started. The Ukrainian non-government initiative emerged called Aerorozvidka, so aerial reconnaissance. And it was the first to introduce small drones into combat. And they also communicated a lot with the state, trying to advocate about this idea of drones being used in the armed forces. Although it was a huge initiative and tens of thousands of drones were provided. Until 2023, this idea was still a volunteer idea provided by volunteers. Pilots were trained by volunteers and so on. Last year, government started its Army of Drones project with the aim to start large manufacturing of drones inside Ukraine. And this was successful. And the goal for this year, for 2024, is to produce 1 million drones in both state and private factories. And as far as I know from my friends who are working with drones, this goal is going to be met if everything goes according to the plan. As you have mentioned, this Zelensky's decree is aimed to make this process more centralized, more efficient, because so far the Russians were more effective in terms of massive production. As soon as Ukrainians have used some innovative idea, Russians adopt this idea and put it on mass production to use it large scale. And this is what Ukraine must do as well. So a large state effort is now developing, but volunteers still continue to supply drones, to develop drones. So now these two branches go in parallel.
The idea of volunteers providing equipment to the army is a very foreign idea here in the United States. When all these drones were being provided by volunteers, how was that seen in the country or by the government?
Okay, we should probably explain that Ukrainian budget is quite limited because of the size of economy and the scale of the war, and the army is just physically not capable to provide all things needed. And the common thing, for example, is that you have an infantry company and the government gives you small rifles, gives grenade launchers and ammunition, but that's all it can give. And you have still other needs. You would like to have a car, a thermal imager, and this drone to be able to fight more effectively. And then you have to look for it yourself. And that's basically how this volunteer movement evolved, because everyone have relatives in the army. They know about these needs. They try to help. And eventually some small groups emerged, but also big institutions, big NGOs, which are providing help on the battalion level. For example, that's how Come Back Alive Foundation works.
Question of how did it happen that the military is being half supplied by volunteers and by the general population? If we go back to Euromaidan, which was a movement that emerged as a desire to improve the country, to make it more efficient, to cut down bureaucracy and corruption, it was a reaction to the ineffective state apparatus and basically a desire to renovate this country, to make it a great country to live in. And we see that this continues basically now because the armed forces of Ukraine unfortunately inherited a lot of drawbacks from old Soviet cumbersome machine. And most of the innovations right now in the Ukrainian army are a grassroots, bottom-up initiative. For instance, one of the largest drone producers in Ukraine now, Escadron, started as a group of investors, basically, who decided to invest their own funds into producing drones absolutely for free, to donate them to the armed forces of Ukraine because they felt that it was their responsibility that Ukraine will win in this war. Basically, people feel that they have a responsibility to help Ukraine win. They invest their own funds and they start growing an initiative that attracts more help, more publicity, and it turns into producing things that Ukraine needs. Most of the initiatives that work, they are such grassroots, bottom-up initiatives.
Providing military equipment is a form of participatory citizenship in Ukraine.
Yes, exactly.
Are there concerns about some sort of regulation or standards?
They evolve also, but in a very grassroots sort of way. For instance, this Escadron production, the largest FPV drone producers in Ukraine, they constantly analyzed how well their drones are doing and what needs to be improved. Constant process of improvement. And they maintain close contact with the soldiers that are using the drones to see if they're being applied effectively, what needs to be changed. Do the soldiers need to be trained? So, it's a constant process of ensuring effectiveness. And I would say this effectiveness is higher than the control standards that are in the Ukrainian army per se, which is really riddled with bureaucracy and paperwork. For instance, right now, drone producers are trying to get state contracts, but now the existing Ukrainian state standards are actually holding them back. I mean, the model that you developed, it will be obsolete in a month because something will happen on the battlefield, some breakthrough. Everything can change in a month. While the paperwork to get a contract from the Ukrainian state, it will take a year. So for this model of drone that becomes obsolete in a month, it will take a year to do the paperwork to get state contracts. So right now in drones, as in many other sectors of Ukraine, the volunteers, the flexible grassroots initiatives, they're proving to be much more effective than the official state, so to speak. And it is this agility and grassroots approach that actually ensure that Ukraine has an upper edge. It's precisely the grassroots approach that allows us to be more technologically capable.
So based on what you're saying, it sounds like even if the armed forces of Ukraine are developing a branch dedicated to drones, the grassroots aspect of it will continue just as much in producing the drones and developing them.
Yeah, of course.
For Americans, that's hard to picture. It's just a different world.
Well, yes, it's been a very long time since you fought a war in your territory, isn't it? It's here. The armed forces are our saviors who are ensuring that we actually get to keep existing as a nation. They are literally the reason that Bohdan and I can talk to you right now and not be killed by the Russians. The perception of armed forces is totally different. And of course, the level of participation of people in Ukraine's armed fight against Russian war, it's also totally different.
Where is Ukraine getting its parts for making drones?
Most of parts are from China, as it is probably for all countries in the world now, because China is leading this production. Also some from Europe, some made in Ukraine, but the largest amount is from China. And I think the same is about Russia, even more, because they have a border from Russia. And basically it's quite hard to stop this supply because it's global, it's going to Europe, and Ukraine can buy these parts from intermediaries just as Russia does. So it's quite hard to limit this its accessibility to these parts. As long as this supply of parts continues, Ukraine will be able to produce drones in huge quantity.
China did move to limit its exports of drones that could be dual-purpose drones under U.S. pressure. This happened in 2023. From what I've been hearing, basically this move from the U.S. to limit the exports of dual-purpose drones hit Ukraine more than Russia. But the producers are still managing it. The manufacturers that I talked to, they have a very complex network of intermediaries because the Chinese do not sell parts directly to Ukraine.
Yes, there are already more than 200 companies, and of course not all of them will survive, but many will. And
Ukraine will benefit greatly from cooperation with technological companies in the West. We are struggling to have the upper edge in technology and development and in production, and it is the technological race that will decide the outcome of the war.
We're grateful that we have partners in Ukraine that we can communicate with. Thank you. Usually we ask the guest if they have a particular piece of music that we can use to close the show. Do you have any music that you would like to recommend?
Actually, I know one. Ocean Elsa, Ocean of Elsa.
Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Скільки ще холоду збудеться, станеться, скільки ще виб'ється тих вікон, скільки в нас з молоду об весну пораниться, скільки ще виставлять тих ікон. Моя відповідь виткана зморшками на чолі, вартими тисячі слів. Вона вишита в пам'яті білими мальвами, кована із сліз матерів. Скільки раз в досвіта проспіває горлиця, скільки нам випаде теплих днів, скільки в нас ясенів від свинцю поколиться, скільки ще вирветься тих дубів. Моя відповідь виткана зморшками на чолі, вартими тисячі слів.
Відповідь. Answer. Okean Elzi. You've been listening to Ukraine 242. Many thanks to our guests, Alya Shandra and Bohdan Ben from Euromaidan Press. Euromaidan Press is an online English-language independent newspaper launched by Ukrainian volunteers in 2014. It provides translations of Ukrainian news, expert analyses, and independent research. They can be found online at euromaidanpress.com. That's spelled EUROMAIDAN press.com. I've been your host, Ursula Ruedenberg. Thank you for listening to Ukraine 242.
Поки ми перейдем зиму в брід, моя відповідь